So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am Dr. Jenny Rongo. I am the Executive Director of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies, and I'm the Director of NCORE. And we are so delighted to have you this afternoon. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, NCORE offers 2 webinars per month on the first and on the last Wednesday of each month. Sometimes we do have additional programming, so look out for those announcements as they hit your inbox. Our next webinar will be on October 6th, and we'll focus on Beyond the Demands, examining institutional characteristics that predict Black student events. This is going to be available to you at no cost. We also have added 2 workshops for October. The first one will be on October 13th, and we shall have 2 experts speak on academic freedom and free speech in the academy, and details will be posted very soon, probably later tomorrow. We shall also have another workshop, October 20th, and we shall have the Rehearsals for Life theater troupe from the University of Oregon, and they will be facilitating how to manage conversations, difficult conversations and dynamics in the classroom, and this will be an interactive workshop. Please visit our website for the full list of webinars and workshops for this fall. Where are you joining us from? Please let us know by utilizing the chat box. Introduce yourself that way, and you are very welcome. Our panelists today are Dr. Claire Valderrama Wallace and Dr. Elizabeth Ching, or Beth. Dr. Valderrama Wallace's journey has taken her from physiology, UCLA, to public health at George Washington University, to nursing at UCSF and UC Davis, in classrooms, clinical settings, public health organizations, harm reduction organizations, and organizing spaces. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Nursing at California State University, East Bay, where she teaches community health nursing, community engagement, epidemiology, and social inequities. She is the MSN program coordinator, co-chairs the department's Dismantling Racism in Nursing Education Task Force, and convenes the university's Indigenous Acknowledgement Collective. She is also a member of Gabriela Auckland, a grassroots Filipino women's organization fighting for the liberation of Filipino women throughout the diaspora, with the knowledge that no one is free until we are all free. A vision for anti-imperialist and anti-racist nursing education, research, policy, and practice guides her pedagogy, service, and scholarship. Dr. Elizabeth Ching is a 3rd-generation Korean Chinese American born in Vallejo, California, and has been an occupational therapist since 1985. Beth has been committed to working with underserved populations throughout her career. She has presented at the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in American Higher Education, that's us, NCORE, about reducing health disparities and mentoring Black, Indigenous, people of color, or as we call them, BIPOC, youth, to enter the health professions. She also held the SMU Faculty Diversity Coordinator position in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Dr. Ching has published in the Journal of Cultural Diversity, Journal of Occupational Therapy Education, Journal of Diversity and Equality in Health and Care, and she has co-authored Psychosocial and Cognitive Issues Affecting Therapy in Neurorehabilitation for the Physical Therapist Assistant 2021. Dr. Ching was honored to receive the 2021 Faculty of the Year Award at SMU. So I'm telling you, we have dynamites today. So their topic today is It's Complicated, Taking Up Space as Asian American Women in Higher Education. And we are very, very, very grateful for Beth and Claire for joining us today. Please post your questions in the Q&A box and they will address them at the end of the presentation. Just a reminder, we have ASL and we have CAT providers here with us today. So you can follow your closed captioning and you can follow ASL. Welcome, Dr. Claire and Dr. Beth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irungu. Thank you everyone for joining us, taking the time out of your beyond busy schedules. And special thank you to our interpreters. So we're going to talk about these complications. And originally this was going to be a really dynamic, interactive in-person workshop at NCORE, but let's do our best to create that nurturing collective space over Zoom. So let's keep going with the slides. The land on which both Beth and I live on and work on is the unceded territory of the Ohlone people, who continue to fight for sacred sites, to repatriate land, to fight to repatriate remains of their ancestors, and to ensure the survival of their life ways. And so Beth and I pay respect to Ohlone tribes past, present, and future, and continuing presence in their homelands. And we invite you all to consider, what does land acknowledgement mean to you as sustained practice in our institutions, in our multiple roles, right? Where we live, work, play, etc. So folks are already introducing yourselves in the chat, keep it going. Feel free to just, post as things come for you, questions, emojis, whatever. And this is just a little bit of information about posting and changing your Zoom name. Okay, so we are so glad you're here. We welcome people of all genders, including transgender and our non-binary siblings. We welcome people of all races and ethnicities, and a special shout out and love for multiracial and multi-ethnic siblings here with us today. We welcome immigrants, we welcome refugees, asylees, folks who identify as 1.5 generation, second generation, third generation, and beyond. We welcome folks who identify as Asian, Asian American, as people who identify most, more, or only with specific ethnicities. We welcome gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, queer, heterosexual, and those for whom none of these labels fit. We welcome language keepers, those for whom language is something that you carry and you bear actively day to day. We welcome folks who have full awareness around maybe speak your ancestral or our ancestral languages day to day, or we understand a couple words, or you feel a little bit homesick and don't quite feel so connected to your language. We also know that our identities and our cultural ways and life ways are not solely attached to language. We welcome people who identify as activists, organizers, agents of change, and people who don't identify in those ways. We welcome people of all ages. We welcome people with different faiths, religious traditions, agnostics, atheists, and seekers. We welcome people with disabilities, visible and invisible. We welcome all of you and all of your roles within academia. We know all these silos, but with the knowledge that we are more than these roles and we are stronger together. We welcome and thank those who support you to be here during this Zoom webinar. We welcome you in all your emotions, feeling joy, feeling grounded, feeling calm, feeling fear, worry, exhaustion, sadness, anger, frustration, agitation, and hope. And we welcome all that we all hold, all the ways we cope with systems of oppression, and all the ways we hold and care for our kin. So Beth and I are going to share a little bit about our own positionalities, and would love to hear a little bit more about you all. Thank you again. Please keep introducing yourselves in the chat. So my name is Claire. Again, my pronouns are she, her, and siya. For folks who aren't familiar, siya is a gender neutral pronoun in Tagalog. And so my parents are from Nueva Ecija in the Philippines. They came here in 1970 and 1973. And so my own identity as a settler here in the East Bay is very much a complex nuance of the quote unquote American dream, which we know is really resulting from systems of oppression and violence. I come here with all of these experiences in different universities only made possible because of certain types of capital that my parents have. And so thinking about my privileges and also the different ways that I navigate oppression, I come to you all here as a daughter. I'm the bunso, I'm the youngest. I'm a parent, I have 2 little boys. I'm a sister, I'm a partner, and I'm a member of Gabriella Oakland. You see here photos with my family, with students who I have learned so much from and with. You see my grandparents, and you see here mobilizations with Gabriella Oakland. My education has taken me in all these sorts of ways, and I'm always trying to keep myself whole, because I don't think public health and physiology and social justice and education should be as separate as they feel day to day. And so I'm here as an internationalist and anti-imperialist nurse and nurse educator, and I'm really, really honored to be here with you all today, and I'll pass it over to Beth.
Oh my, thank you so much. Claire's just fabulous. She's a hard act to follow. So my name is Elizabeth Ching, and please call me Beth. So I am an occupational therapist by trade and an educator. I identify as a 3rd generation Korean Chinese American from Vallejo, California. That's a mouthful, but I'm very proud of where I come from. Unfortunately, I always tease our students, I come from B-Town. So if you're a fan of old school rap, that's the home of, I just lost his name because I'm so nervous. You fill in the blank. It's also the home of her, which we'll talk about a little bit later. She's a Grammy Award winner. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. E40, yes, E40. Actually, I grew up on the same street as him, Magazine Street, which I did not find out about until later because my son had to tell me, and he's 17 years old now. And at the time, E40 was really big. I was actually living in Austin, Texas. So I was listening to Selena, but we'll get into that later. So anyhow, I have 36 years of professional experience in the healthcare industry and 25 years of experience in teaching. So those are my 2 big vocational passions. And my practice area is mental health, and I have a background in equity and inclusion training. This is my family. I didn't even tell them that I was going to show our holiday picture because they're super private, but through marriage, I belong to a beautiful Mexican-American family from Laredo, Texas, for those of you that are familiar. I saw some of you coming from Texas, so you know Laredo, right at the border, Texas-Mexico border. And that's my son, Antonio, and then my husband, Antonio. So I also want to speak to, thank you so much for that. And I also want to speak to a little bit of our NCORE roots. We have much respect for NCORE, both Claire and I. And NCORE is this long tradition. I must tell you that as an academic, we'll talk about this later, but as an academic, you know, I didn't have too many mentors in my academic journey. And NCORE honestly was my mentor. Every year I would look forward to going to NCORE and just feeling so sustained and rejuvenated as someone that identifies as a woman of color, and especially in my role as a faculty member. I'd always look forward to that, save all my continuing education money to go to NCORE, oftentimes at the expense of going to my occupational therapy or my professional conference that I was required to go to. I would save all my money to go to NCORE because I found it in many ways more useful to my work as an educator. So we both have Bay Area connections. I believe Claire is his hometown is Alameda, California, and my hometown, as I mentioned to you, is Vallejo, California. And we had talked. If you're familiar with going to NCORE conferences in person, they're wonderful gatherings, and I oftentimes remember what year it was by what city we were in. Claire, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say Claire and I first became aware of each other at the, was it 2016? It was the conference in, maybe Dr. Rungu can help me. It was the conference in New Orleans, I want to say. And we both became aware of each other through a common friend. And I went to one of Claire's workshops, and I was just blown away by her presence and her depth of knowledge. And my friend introduced me to her. And then since we're both health educators, me in occupational therapy and Claire in nursing, we had a really natural friendship and bond that we developed. And over the years, when we've gone to, honestly, we did not keep track of each other because of our busy schedules, but we got track of each other when we went to the NCORE conferences. And we always talked about, boy, wouldn't it be great to work together and have this level of community that we felt as women that identified as Asian or Asian American, and also being faculty. So we talked, and in 2019, we decided that we would try and present this conference, because we just thought, for many of us, I have to speak for myself, it's very isolating to be an Asian American faculty member. And so again, we just developed this relationship. And as Claire mentioned to you before, our first thought was that we were going to try and make this workshop very interactive and try and build some community amongst one another. So our time together, we want to learn about you and what brings you here. What are your truths, our truths, complications, nuances, layers, our voices, and resistance? And we're going to try and set a little bit of context and talk about some initiative, movements, and opportunities. We're going to reflect a bit. We want to give abundant appreciations, not only to our ancestors and people that have gone before us and whose shoulders we are standing upon, but abundant appreciations to one another in the struggle. We want to do a visualization activity. We want to encourage dialogue and have plenty of time for question and answers.
So what brings you here today? Please feel free to share in the chat if you haven't already. I know folks have started sharing your names, pronouns, and where you're joining from, but feel free to add ideas or hopes, feelings, things you're wondering. If you don't, even if they don't feel fully formed and super articulate, whatever articulate means, we could say a lot about that. Questions, images, whatever, we just want to hear and get a sense of what brings you here. We want to make sure that we touch upon those in our kind of presentation and also in our Q&A. So, you know, the focus of our time together is space, taking up space. So I thought, what are the different definitions of space and how might our, you know, different institutions define space? A continuous area or expanse, which is free, available, and unoccupied. I think that word unoccupied is leading us to think a lot of things here. Dimensions of height, depth, and width. A period of time. Distance from people or things that a person needs to remain comfortable. A blank area. The opportunity to assert or experience one's identity and needs. So these are some that I found, and I'm wondering, how do you all define space? What does space mean to you? What does it feel like to take up space or to share space, right? So I'm gonna drop this link in the chat for a Padlet, and I would love for folks to take, maybe we'll take a couple minutes and just share, you know, what does space mean to you? How do you share it? How do you create it? How do folks invite you into their space? When do you step back, right? So we'll take maybe a minute and a half and just give you some time to open up that Padlet and share, you know, what does space mean to you and how you navigate it. And if you haven't used a Padlet before, you just click on the pink circle with the white plus sign on the bottom right, and then you can just type away. Okay, when visuals are concerned, okay, yeah, being vulnerable, your footprint, whether it is what I represent, how I present, or how others respond back to me, the ability to be genuine and heard in some capacity. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Megan, for sharing what brings you here. Let others approach when they're ready. Yes. Okay, when I'm free to express myself authentically. Imagine if that were the day-to-day, every moment, right? What would need to happen for that to be our default? Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Just keep adding them. I'll share one brief story. One time when I felt seen and heard in a way that shocked me and surprised me, was actually just a year ago. I was in a committee meeting, and the chair of that committee said, "Claire, you look like you wanted to say something." And I'm still to this day in some spaces surprised when someone says my name and notices that I have something to say. And that still kind of rocks me to realize that was a year ago. I just submitted my dossier for tenure. I've been teaching at East Bay for several years now. I started off as clinical faculty and then lecturer, and just hearing someone say my name and inviting me to speak. And so that was a whole bunch of feelings there, right? Okay, the ability to be genuine and heard through empathy and authenticity, not having my motives questioned. Yes. Class, race, gender, sexuality, religion, geography, ability, and other intersections. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, what is comfortable. Space is a space to lean in, a space to share, to be vulnerable, to connect. So thank you so much, everyone. As things come up for you, or what space means, feel free to keep adding it to the Padlet. And this is available to you. So if there are times you're feeling a certain way, feel free to go back to this link, right? And so we'll keep going. I'll pass it to Beth.
Thank you, Claire. So we want to take this time to talk about, making this a more intimate gathering. What do you want others to know about our APIDA people? So Asian Pacific Islander Desi Americans, I think, is the term that is typically used now at universities to encompass the big umbrella of folks that identify under that umbrella. Okay, so the quote is from Yuri Kochiyama, and she was, again, I know you all can read, but I'll just say it again, a civil rights activist coming up in the 60s. And I just love this quote that she has. The most powerful weapon for we women of color is truth. Go out and tell truth everywhere. So what we're going to just, kind of unpack that. What are our truths? What would you want others to know about our group? And please feel free to share also in the chat your truths, our truths. It's complicated. I think that's part of the thing of being in the APIDA group, right? Folks that identify like we do. It's complicated. Oftentimes we are in discussions around race. It's oftentimes on a black and white binary discussion, and that does not fit us. So it can be seem somewhat complicated. In the chat, it says Yifeng says, can be as great as other races as leaders, especially for API women. Good, thank you. True. Oftentimes we are not taught to claim that power. It's unfortunate. So yes, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Thank you so much for sharing that. What complications, nuances, textures, contradictions, and/or journeys of healing do you tend to guard and keep close? And you're welcome to take note on a piece of paper, a Google Doc, in your mind or your heart, or add to the chat if you feel comfortable or called to. So speaking of the chat, F. Espiritu says, we have every right to take up space. True. Mei Yang says, we as APIDA women have voices and thoughts too. We can be leaders. Yes. Donna Wang Su says, stepping into a space and feeling foreign or minority, but not minority, quote, or looking, quote, too young. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes. I see other people are agreeing.
If I can add one thing, I appreciate the comment about appearing too young. I think I get comments pretty regularly about whether I look like a student or I'm on a chat with a group of friends from nursing. I went to nursing school with, and the group I was tied with, we're Pan-Asian, right? And we text about how do you wear a hair so that folks will respect you and listen to you and believe what you have to say? How do you dress so that you can look quote unquote professional, right? So I appreciate you sharing that.
So true. I'm a baby boomer, so I don't get that anymore, but I did when I was younger. Okay, TMI, folks, for me saying that. Okay, but yeah, thank you. Please add if you'd like to speak more on that, because that's pretty heavy. I think when we have this discussion, and I think that was cause for our choice of topic for the let's see. I immigrated here. Excuse me, I missed one. Let's see. Let's see, let me read some out. We are you, this is home. Raquel says, same here, Claire, in terms of the being quote, considered too young. Twee says, the surprise by others when we turn out not to be the model minority leader. Yes, that's another stereotype. I immigrated here in my late 30s. I am not a 0.5 gen, I'm a whole person. Thank you so much. Yeah, sometimes we hear those distinctions around when about immigration, when folks immigrated and 1.5, but we also are our own person and we can't be defined by that. Thank you so much. Very, very valid. Next slide, please. Well, there's such great stuff in the chat. Okay, so okay, I'm going to get to that one very soon. So this is also a slide just about some things that we've been told, or some things that kind of make up or sort of the fabric of these threads of our the complications in our lives. And you can read some of those. We have to sometimes code switch. Sometimes we're told that mixed kids are the most beautiful, and Claire and I are both moms of multiracial children, but it's kind of a I don't know, it just lands kind of odd with me being told that, you know, about many things. Some of the other common ideas we're dealing with is around model minority, and we're also activism and organizing is very important to both of us. What's private and what's okay to share, you know, trying to break out sometimes of a colonial mindset is very difficult sometimes. And we like to try and cheer each other on through the world of academia, and volunteering to announce names at ceremonies to guard and honor our names. That was something I forgot to mention, that was also what brought Claire and I together, is that we both realized that we often do this at graduation ceremonies, because you know, our families are there, our names are so important and connect us to our families, our culture, our loved ones. And oftentimes people do not pronounce our names correctly, and when it's unrecognizable at graduation, it just really killed our spirit. So we offered to do that for our students. Let me take a look at the chat. What have y'all been talking about? Let's see. Oh my, I'm sorry if I don't get to everyone's. Donna says, I was told not to wear my hair down because it made me look too young. Or when we were hiring for a director level position and I was part of the interviewing committee, I made a comment about neither of the finalists had any financial experience, which is a good 40% of the job. I had an associate dean tell me, well, at least both of them look older than you. Oh my gosh. The two finalists were white men that were balding and in their late 20s. Oh my goodness. Okay. Lynn says, always occupying an in-between space, never being fully accepted in any one group. True. Allison says, fearing that I fit into model minority stereotypes too much and conflicted about potentially representing that to white folks. True. Megan says it's fetishizing. Cassandra says, having no visibility in leadership roles like construction. And Claire says, so appreciate everyone sharing here. True. Sylvia says, on age, appearance, perception, how much do we change to be taken seriously? And then when do we stop changing ourselves for an institution that isn't supportive of our authentic selves? It's a difficult balance. So true. Etta says, I would add that mixed kids is nuanced too. It depends on the mixing. That is, some mixings are considered more beautiful than other mixings. Oh, yes. Okay, yes. on age, appearance, perception, how much do we change to be taken seriously? And then when we do, we stop changing ourselves for an institution that isn't supportive of our authentic selves. It's a difficult balance. Okay. My undergraduate graduation butchered my name completely. I was so heartbroken because I'm a first-gen student. That was my moment, and for my family, and we couldn't even celebrate it. Oh, yes. Not seen, invisible, and not given the benefit of the doubt as your white colleagues, yes. Okay. I'm going to have to stop here. I'm so sorry, interpreters. I know I'm going quickly. I am in a biracial family. My partner is white, and his family forgets that I'm a person of color and identify as Asian. Once they thought I was Native Hawaiian. My partner and I teach and share our young son about his multiculturalism, and it makes his family uncomfortable, and they are not willing to connect. Thank you all so much. I'm so sorry I can't get to all the chats. But yes, you could, just reading your chats, we know how complicated it can be as someone who identifies as in the APIDA group. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned to you, I am from Vallejo. I'm very proud. I think Vallejo, my city, is from the 2010 census. It was actually the most diverse city in the U.S. with the rubric or measure being a quarter of the population being divided equally among white, African American, PIDA, and Latinx populations. A small city. It's about 117,000. So her identifies as being both Filipina and African American, and I really like her quote. And it gets to some of the comments about, quote, never fitting in. So she says, being Black and Filipino, sometimes I feel too Black for Asian kids or too Asian for the Black kids. It was a hard balance to find. I realized not fitting in is my superpower, and I wouldn't be here if I tried to fit in. And I totally agree with that. Next slide, please. Stacy Milburn, who unfortunately we lost recently, a young activist for disability rights. She said, we live and love interdependently. We know no person is an island. We need one another to live. No one does their own dental work. We all need support. Hierarchy of what support is okay to need and what isn't is just ableism. So again, yes, these are some of the complications we're dealing with around all of these oppressions. Okay, also another person we lost recently, poet Janice Mirakatani. I found that my wounds begin to heal when the voices of those endangered by silence are given power. The silence of hopelessness, of despair, buried in the depths of poverty, violence, racism, are more deadly than bullets. The gift of light in our compassion, our listening, our works of love is the gift of life to ourselves. Next slide, please. I just love this quote from Malala. There are two powers in the world. One is the sword and the other is the pen. There is a third power stronger than both, that of women. Next slide, please. All you Walking Dead fans or Minari enthusiasts, our brother Stephen Yen. Sometimes I wonder if the Asian American experience is what it's like to think about everyone, it's what it's like to think about everyone else when nobody else is thinking about you. And again, I think that's why Claire and I really bonded and wanted to, join forces and try and build some community amongst ourselves. Next slide, please. Grace Lee Boggs, another civil rights activist who we've already lost, said, we urgently need to bring to our communities the limitless capacity to love, serve, and create for and with each other. We urgently need to bring the neighborhood back into our hoods. not only in our inner cities, but also in our suburbs, our gated communities, on Main Street and Wall Street, and on Ivy League campuses. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it back over to Claire. Thank you for your participation.
Everyone, so much appreciation for what you're sharing in the chat. We have so much power, right? We have so much. And leadership, there's so many ways that we are leaders. And we don't need to be in positions of quote unquote power or, management or administration in our institutions to be the leaders that we are. We don't need that permission, right? White supremacist institutions aren't going to recognize all that we bring, right? But we see it in each other. And I think something that happens is when we don't have a strong foundation of understanding ourselves and each other. I'm thinking about ethnic studies here. We don't see that we have been engaged in centuries of resistance, right? On the left here, we see women holding signs that say, "Hear our voice," and this is in Myanmar. On the right, we have folks mobilizing in the Philippines during People's State of the Nation, saying, we demand our rights, we demand health. And these aren't images that we see. The pathways that have led all of us here to wherever we are so varied, but there are many connections among us. And really, I think of people power. And I grew up, very middle class, very much anyone who agitates or does something different or speaks up, especially if they're a woman or a girl, that was seen as really inappropriate or not ladylike or not professional. But then I learned through joining Gabriela Oakland that we Filipino people are so strong and have been resisting colonization and imperialism for centuries. And I only started learning about that in my 20s. So when we talk about hear our voices, central to that is sharing our stories, right? Which is why taking the time to share with each other is so powerful, right? I think of farmers in India, on strike and protesting for months, right? And we can see the connections to our own food ecosystems here in the US, right? Who is feeding us? Who is caring for us, right? And so just thinking about all these layers and examples of resistance. I think of Ruby Ibarra, and congrats to her. She just got married last week. I was looking at the amazing photos on Instagram. But one of her lyrics is "Island women rise, walang makakatigil." Walang makakatigil means no one's gonna stop you, nothing's gonna stop you, right? Brown woman rise, alamin ang iyong ugat. We know our roots. And so what happens when we connect with our roots? And what does that mean? That means facing trauma, that means facing harm. That means digging in deep and saying, where do I come from? Who do I come from, right? So there's pain, but there's also such power and joy and healing from that as well. I think of Ocean Vuong. If anyone's ever read on Earth Through Briefly Gorgeous, I wonder if you felt like I did. Like, I'm so glad I'm alive today to be able to read this type of work, especially as a nurse who studied physiology and public health. We're not asked to read beautiful writings, so expressive and affirming, like Ocean Vuong's work. He wrote, "Because the sunset, like survival, exists only on the verge of its own disappearing. To be gorgeous, you must first be seen, but to be seen allows you to be hunted." When I first read that, I got goosebumps, and I kind of have them right now. And what does that mean for us when we talk about taking up space? Hearing and reading the phrase "to be hunted," what does that mean for us? Especially in academia, right? And I think about, we measure what we value. So who is doing the measuring? What are we measuring, right? Even in our institutions, what does URM mean? What does API mean? What does Asian American mean, right? But we see here, Asian Americans were the fastest growing racial or ethnic group from 2000 to 2019. We see that our peoples have been attacked. Yellow peril is alive and well. It's not new. It's taken on multiple forms, right? So what does that mean? And I appreciate folks sharing what they're connecting to personally, because even the notions of academia and family life, diaspora, our families, these are silos that don't really, that's not how we live. We live our lives fully, and we try to code switch as best we can. but how can we pursue wholeness, right? I'm going to pass this back to Beth.
Thank you, Claire. So I've kind of, how do you call it? I have mixed feelings about this because this is a survey that I developed to try and look at some of the bias against us from microaggressions all the way to violence. So I just want to ask you all if you would like to do this. It's totally voluntary, and I don't want to have a trigger for more trauma. So it's totally voluntary, but it will ask you, it's a very short quiz that will ask you questions about if you've experienced this. And I developed this because for a couple of reasons, but one of them personally being that, like many folks, I last year during, I guess 2020, I was I didn't call a survivor of some racial threats, and so I had to report it to the API hate, which I believe there's a slide on that later. And so it got me to wondering, and it was kind of like not a surprise, and I wasn't hurt, and I just went on with my day because unfortunately I've been dealing with that for a long time, ever since I've been growing up. But it just made me wonder, now that we have unfortunately the spotlight of all of this anti API hate, kind of taking a look at that on a spectrum. So yeah, I want to just invite you all, if you would like to, it's totally voluntary, you don't have to. Here's the link, and if you would like to participate in that, we would love to have you do that, and then leave a few minutes for you to do that. And it's not to stir up more trauma, but just to kind of get a spectrum of data on what we're dealing with, often on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that and hush up for a second.
Okay, so please feel free to keep going with the survey or take it later. The link is in the chat.
Yes, that's perfectly fine. Thank you so much. So you know where it is, and I'm going to turn it back over to Claire. Thank you.
Okay. So thinking about Ocean Vuong's previous quote about being hunted, I wanted us to think about this as well. Let no one mistake us for the fruit of violence, but that violence, having passed through the fruit, failed to spoil it. So I want to also have this affirming statement here from Ocean Vuong. So I wanted to ask if folks wanted to share strategies. What gets you through? What helps you navigate the spaces that you navigate? Where do you look to when you're looking to strategize, right? So as you share those in the chat and we learn from each other, I wanted to share about some initiatives, some movements, some opportunities for us to consider. So as we go through this, feel free to keep adding to the chat what strategies you use when it comes to taking up space. So I'm going to talk about these topics here. Disaggregation of data. We're going to talk about spaces for centering and solidarity, and other topics here. So let's just take those one at a time so we have time for Q&A. So how are data disaggregated at your institutions? I asked earlier, who is included in URM? What does that mean? And then when we think about how race is a direct result of racism, what does that mean for the data that we gather and what we need to advance our struggle, and also in solidarity, right, with fellow historically excluded peoples, right? And we think about just how rich in diversity, all forms, Asian is, right? The category of Asian or Asian American. But we look at income, or we break it down by educational achievement. There is so much inequity there, right? So when you just lump us all together into API, what do we lose? What are the narratives we're silencing, right? I wanted to share that UCLA's Health Policy Institute is having this upcoming webinar. So let's keep looking at these, how folks are leading the way in terms of challenging how we gather data. Okay, and again, if you want these slides, please email me. I have my email address at the end, and you can just Google me. But how are we centering each other and ourselves? How are we being in solidarity as well? And maybe even in kinship, right? So are there centers that are focused on Asian Pacific Islander, faculty, staff associations, and student groups, right? I know for myself, as a member of APIFSA, API Faculty Staff Association at East Bay, it is such a unique home for me. I can go into a Zoom and not feel like I have to hold up all these ways of protecting myself or sussing out who I can trust or how authentic I can be, right? Folks were sharing in the chat, figuring out how authentic you can be. What affinity groups are at your institutions? How can we work in solidarity with, across students, staff, and faculty to bring in the spaces that are needed? Not just, here, let me check this box. You have a room that you can use on the campus, but we're not really going to support it in a sustainable long-term way, right? What are the systems of accountability and repair? Do you just have a town hall and then we're done, right? How are we going to create the alternatives for ourselves and not just wait for administrators to do that for us, right? Or to say yes or give us the green light. How do we connect beyond our departments, beyond our colleges or divisions? How do we connect with community everywhere, right? And so there are some ways that we challenge white supremacy in our institutional practices. Notions of linear time, notions of what silence means. I talk about silence a lot in the classroom because I always know there are particular interpretations when especially Asian women are quiet and how we are lumped as not being assertive or strong, not being engaged, too demure, too agreeable, etc. Right? Being concise. Robert's Rules of Order really shapes communication and decision making in really particular ways, right? And so, what are the walls between academic, personal, professional, and across our generations? And where is the multiplicity? It's one thing to say there's this one organization or this one group, but we need a richness of where we can come together and connect and strategize, right? Our needs and concerns known and met beyond just maybe a needs assessment or even a climate survey. What else is needed? How do we share, right? For Filipinos, I think of kwentuhan. How do we come together and share story in a way that won't be captured by a climate survey, right? Is there adequate, appropriate infrastructure, right? Who are the ones administering over affinity centers or student success centers? Who's valued, who's heard, right? I think about how are we partnering with university diversity officers? Are they supported? Are they amplified? Are they properly compensated, right? And also what happens when faculty aren't on campus? And I say this from a faculty perspective, because I wonder when faculty are largely away off campus during summers, there are decisions that are made that impact our colleagues in student affairs, that impact students. And so when we're divided and siloed, we don't really care for each other because we're in certain ways that we can, because we're not as aware. And I think about adjunct faculty, tenure track faculty, tenured, how are we also divided and siloed and keeping us from really lifting each other up, right? So there's a lot there we can kind of think about. Looking at the chat, Asian is still grouped as one category and it's a big problem. Yes, I mean, I am so thankful for our Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Research. She's just a badass Asian woman who just knows what's up and really meets with us and says, what do you need, right? So that we can actually use data to make things better. Yeah, absolutely. So how decisions are made. And again, we measure what we value. So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit, thinking about how do we connect with each other? Something I really valued from our API Faculty Staff Association at East Bay was we held space for each other. You know, when the tragedy that happened in Atlanta occurred, within a week, I think within 4 days, we had a space where we could just come together. I think that was the first time I ever yelled and cried in the same Zoom. And I felt like no one was gonna judge me. So how do we hold space for each other? And what is the role of our artists and culture bearers, right? So something for us to also consider. I'm gonna name a number of organizations here because I think when we look to organizing and making change, we can learn so much from grassroots orgs, right? There are things that I see 20-year-old comrades in Gabriella Oakland doing that I wish my colleagues were doing when it comes to facilitating meetings, to holding space, to leadership. You don't need a PhD to do this. You don't need a master's to do this, right? But there's certain portals that we have access to because of these degrees. But I would love for us to connect with some of these orgs, right? Red Canary Song, a grassroots collective of Asian and migrant sex workers working and organizing transnationally. They held space after what happened in Atlanta. A beautiful vigil that we can probably still find online. Beth mentioned Stop API Hate. That's based out of SF State. Again, we measure what we care about, right? We don't need to wait for, let's create it ourselves. Let's create those alternatives ourselves and not wait for these institutional powers to say, you can do that, right? APINC, this is near and dear to my heart here in the Bay Area and Ohlone territory. The first ever community-led needs assessment of API trans and gender nonconforming folks in the Bay Area. And so as a nurse educator, all students have to study this and say, it's not just folks with a license who can find out what our communities are dealing with and grappling with, right? So if you're not local here, find these organizations that are doing similar work. Because when you find a political home and a cultural home, you will feel grounded wherever you are in different ways, right? So this isn't so separate from our work in academia. I think of 18 Million Rising. I love this. Did you eat yet? That's how my parents say they love me when I talk on the phone. They don't say I love you, they don't say thank you, but they ask me what I've eaten. And now they ask me if I fed my kids, right? So what are the ways we connect with each other, right? And communicate with each other? I think of powerful organizations like this one, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, right? They have an upcoming webinar. I think of API Women Lead, right? So we can join these orgs, follow them for inspiration to continue to develop as leaders and to bring that work into our academic spaces and vice versa, right? I think of Chinese Progressive Association making things happen here in the Bay Area and beyond. I think of Equality Labs, right? Focus on ending caste apartheid and gender-based violence. I think of APAN, I think of how we hold each other. And when I think of Black and Asian solidarity in Oakland, Chinatown, I think of APAN. And I think of Asians for Black Lives. So multiple organizations just to get us thinking about what are the ways that we bring these grounded cultural, political, economic, powers for change together. I think of International League, People's Struggles, right? This is global, we are global. We are internationalist, right? That's the power that we have. I think of International Women's Alliance. I think of La Via Campesina. I think of peasants and farmers around the world who are organizing, right? Not waiting for the World Bank or the IMF, right? And I think of amazing ethnic studies leaders and comrades in the Bay and around who are saying, learning doesn't just have to happen in academia. Let's bring it directly to our communities. Right. And I also want to say a big shout out to Killjoy, a Filipina artist based in Houston. She took Anandati's Roy about pandemics being portals for change, and she turned it into this beautiful piece of work here. So we got to really nurture and nourish and take care of our cultural workers. I'll pass it to Beth.
Thank you so much, Claire. So kind of coming full circle, that's a lot of information. So I hope that you feel inspired to get involved even more if you can. So coming back to us in terms of us as individuals, we'd like to take a moment for you to reflect on your space in academia. We want you to think of this as a, if you could think of a rosebud and a thorn. So some positive, maybe negatives, maybe things you want to explore, something you're looking forward to. So if you could think of those three things. First, the rose. Think of a positive outcome or success or a highlight that you have as being in academia. And also, if you could think of a bud, a new idea, goal, or something you're looking forward to. And then finally, a thorn, a challenge you anticipate or experiencing or are experiencing, and you can use support around. Let me look at the chat because there's the, oh yes, it's in the chat. Thank you so much. The tiny URL link is in the chat as well. So please take a moment to think about those three things.
You're also welcome to add it to the chat if that's more accessible as well.
So we're going to multitask a little bit. So think about the rosebud and thorn exercise. And also we want to just take a moment of silence for abundant appreciations for our cultures, our histories, our struggles, and our ancestors who have done so much to get us to where we are today. Okay, thank you so much. My turn again. Folks, I wrote a poem very recently just for this occasion, and I was inspired by Claire's discussion around space. So I entitled this poem, Asian Sister in Academia. You know how we were raised. Wait your turn. Don't get the biggest piece. Eat the ends of the loaf of bread. Sit in the middle and make yourself smaller. Congratulations, you made it to the big time, academia. Wait your turn. Don't get the leadership position. Have your idea vetted by a white male colleague. Sit on the social events committee. Make yourself smaller. Haven't we paid enough dues? Didn't we get skipped over while waiting our turn? Doesn't someone have their feet on our chair? Asian sisters everywhere, it is time to take our rightful place at the table. Claim your space. No, you cannot take the space. Someone is sitting here. That someone is us. Thank you. Next slide, please. Great, so now I'm going to turn the tables on you. I want you to think about taking up space. So let's have this visualization activity where you think about in your setting, at your academic environment, because there's so many of us. I know not everyone is faculty. I'm sure we have some students here, hopefully. You know, we have folks in student affairs, you know, like that saying, I think it's so true. I know sometimes people use it, overuse it. I'm going to overuse it now probably, but it takes a village, you know, to raise up our students and lift up our students, right? So please take a moment to think about how you're going to take up space. And we hope that you feel encouraged and inspired by our discussions and the chats, what's been going on with the chats, and all of these ways that we're sharing with one another. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Miss Claire.
So you wanted to make sure if you would like any access to slides, please email me. I'm really eager for us to get into some dialogue and discussion. So that's it for us.
Thank you so much. And again, please continue to, you know, we have all the links so we can continue some of this in a bit, but yeah, we wanted to make sure that we left sufficient time for your questions and hopefully our responses to those.
Thank you so much, Beth and Claire. This was very eye-opening, but I know that there are several questions, so I would really like for us to have a conversation. So if anyone has a question, can you please write your question in the Q&A box, and Claire and Beth will respond to that. I'm sure somebody has a question, but I also had noticed something in the chat. You will get a list of the organizations, just email Claire or Beth. And someone had mentioned, I would like to know how to address these issues. Like, what are the real solutions? Can you share a real best practice? Like, how do you take up space yourself? I'm sure this has happened.
I'd like to share one. Folks, I'm 59 years old, my goodness. And so much of my life was trying to please other people. And, a lot of our cultures, I think there's a beautiful part to me. I just have to speak for myself. For my culture as a Chinese Korean or Korean Chinese American, part of our culture is about humility and modesty and how beautiful that is. And we chatted with Dr. Arungu also, and I think she identifies with a culture that also values that so much. And we don't have the corner on the market as being folks that are Asian, but I feel like that oftentimes translates into people thinking that we're too apologetic, or that we don't speak up for ourselves, or we don't brag on ourselves, I like to say, or we're not tooting our horn all the time. And so last year I decided, you know what, I'm going to quit apologizing. I still mess up sometimes and I apologize. But the most I get to is I'll say, forgive me. I don't never say I'm sorry anymore to my work colleagues, because you know what? I'm not sorry most of the time, honestly. But, I will say forgive me occasionally, to the students if I, don't put up a slide or whatever I might mistake on my hat. But I just try to take back some of my power, because I don't want to be in this position where I'm always apologizing or not feeling like I'm good enough, or, I am good enough. So that's one little thing that I've done, and I'm going to pass it to Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I think I'll share a couple examples. So one in terms of like pedagogy and what learning materials we select, right? So in nursing, last week, we talked about housing, we talked about land, we talked about displacement. So I invited folks to choose from multiple videos to watch. And one of those was how San Francisco erased a neighborhood. And that was about the International Hotel and the elder Filipino and Chinese men who live there. And so it's also connecting students and saying our stories matter. We should know these stories, and health and housing are absolutely connected. So let's bring in our different voices and filmmakers and histories. And another way I would say is there are times I still have my my dad's People Power yellow t-shirt, and I will actually wear that to class, and I'll wear it to class when I am talking about maybe epidemiology or maybe health policy, and I'll say these notions of professionalism, they make us think we have to only listen to people who are dressed a certain way. And I will tell them how my mom raised me to dress a certain way so that I could be respected. And it's very classed and is very much tied to particular migration patterns and stories. But I'll say, y'all, you trust me, you listen to me, we're connected, right? We built trust with each other in this learning environment. I'm wearing a t-shirt. Let's talk about how we don't trust maybe patients who look a certain way. So I'm much more explicit about how I show up in a classroom or in a Zoom space and connect that to what we think we're learning about health and nursing. And the last thing I will do is I've done all these things that scare me in the last 2 years. For 1 year, I served as chairperson of Gabriela Oakland. And so when there are times, we stood up and we showed up at hospitals in the face of, I think we are 4%, Filipinos are 4% of US nurses, but over 30% of deaths from COVID among nurses. And that's because of labor export policy and US imperialism. So I am bringing that into our curriculum. And I've also, we've been working on organizing with workers. And so Gab Oakland, we showed up with our Filipino contingent to multiple hospitals in the Bay Area and said, you need to take care of healthcare workers during a pandemic. You need to provide PPE. And then there were times when I spoke, I was served as the media spokesperson, and my mom saw me on the news, and I know she was scared, and that's real because we know what happened during martial law and what's happening today in the Philippines. But I said, you know what, mommy, if that were you, because my mom's a retired nurse, if that were you, I would be out there in front of the news saying, you need to protect our elders, our titas, our moms, our siblings, our cousins, our students, right? Or students who we teach. I don't want to say our students. So those are ways, but all these ways I've come to learn to take up space have really been navigations of fear, to be honest. But I look to the connections I've made across campus and the connections in community grassroots orgs. So when we talk about orgs feeling like it's scary because they maybe are too political, I will say, you know what? I need someone to protect my loved ones and my kin. And I think of the Antipua case, Kanaka Maoli in Hawaii. And she says, you know, when your bravery is bigger than your fear or stronger than your fear, and that what propels me. And that's what helps me stay grounded with colleagues and friends and comrades in academia and beyond.
Your bravery should be greater and stronger than your fears. And like Beth was saying, before you say, I'm so sorry, what are you apologizing for? Should you even be apologizing? And I like what Megan is saying here, that, you know, try to make sure they are considered as part of the foundation when making plans, programming, decisions, and not just an afterthought. But that is well said. But, you know, Jen is saying, given how we are socialized, we are not supposed to take up space. However, when we are direct and advocate for ourselves, we are deemed aggressive. So how do we balance that?
I'd like to take an attempt at that. And again, I might not be the end all be all, but you know, I had to, at my university, because I have a master's degree and the program that I'm teaching in has an entry-level doctoral degree, I had to go back at this late stage in my life and go get a doctoral degree. And one of the things I learned from that is, you know, you have to learn the master's toolkit. And the master's toolkit is about evidence. And, you know, when you cite things and you put things numerically, I feel like the way I try and deem it to myself is some people are really moved by numbers. And that's not me, but that I have to appeal to learners that are moved by numbers. So I will cite statistics and the research to back up what I'm saying, because then it's really hard for them to say I'm angry or I'm aggressive or I don't know my place, basically, when I have that data behind me. So that's one weapon in the toolkit. I hope that helps a bit. Claire, I don't know if you want to, Claire's the master at this. So
No. I make mistakes. I have made mistakes and I keep trying to learn. The only thing I'll add is accountability partners. And I have accountability partners who are Filipino, primarily Filipino and Black. And whether that's in organizing world with Gabriela, or whether that's putting a dossier together or developing a workshop together, I have accountability partners because I will keep making mistakes and I want to be around people who will genuinely tell me what's going on and how I can do better. But I'm not just going to put that work on my accountability buddies. But then I also put in the chat power mapping, and you don't have to do this alone. You're not alone, even if it's outside of your institution, right?
So, and Rachel is thanking you both for the session, and her question is regarding resources. I'm a board member for an AAPI employee resource group for a federal agency. As a board, we are hoping to do a session on talking about mental health in the AAPI community and the stigma, shame, cultural notions that are tied to this. Do either of you have any resources to share in regards to how to facilitate a session like this? And mental health has really cut across the board, especially during COVID, for communities of color. Do you have any resources that you could share with her? And Beth and Claire's email are in the chat. So Rachel, if you want to reach out to them, they probably have some resources on mental health.
Please reach out and email.
I'll just say Asian Health Services, and there's also an Asian mental health organization. I can't remember the exact name, Claire, but they're both based in the SF Oakland Bay Area. Claire, do you happen to know the name of the?
I'm not quite sure. Something I do want to emphasize is another reason why grassroots organizations are so powerful is because they know what's happening. They know what the issues are. They don't come at it from and this is me as a licensed person with an MPH and an MSN and PhD. They are not taught convoluted ways of viewing health that are based on white supremacy through our institutions of education. So they connect directly and are able to know exactly what the topics are, what the concerns are, right? Which is why APINC, for example, they put together that first API trans and GNC needs assessment that folks in maybe the MPHI program went to probably wouldn't even dream up unless they spoke to API trans and GNC folks. But one other thing I'll add is there's one article by a Filipina and Egyptian woman, and it's an NPR article, and I think the title is How I Was Able to Speak to My Filipino Mom About Mental Health Issues. And so I think that would be a really, I'll find the link and put it in the chat. But notions around, well, I came here with these experiences and I suffered and I sacrificed this. And you came here, how can life be hard for you? Because you're now in the States and I have access to all these things. So notions of belonging and suffering based on what our different experiences have been across generations. But please email us so we can share more.
So there's a comment in the chat, and I think it would be really helpful to address that. When we talk about some of these issues, especially not only for, APIDA groups, but also for other BIPOC groups, most of the people who need to hear this stuff are not in these conversations. So you realize nothing changes. So how really do we get folks to know what we are talking about and why this is important? How have you done that in your institutions, for example?
And that's the $1 million question. It's like adult learning and lifelong learning. It's kind of a shoe. Maybe I might lob that to Claire first and think on that for a moment.
Well, so for me, something I will say really upfront is community health nursing as a specialty is not overseen and policed the same way that hospital-based nursing is. And so when it comes to materials I can bring into my courses, I can go rogue. And then I end up with a colleague, we started a dismantling racism in nursing education task force in our department. And so my colleague, her background as a pediatric nurse practitioner is in critical race theory. And so she and we did a solid audit of all of our course syllabi. And because we are positioned in particular ways in the department, I'm chair of student affairs, I'm on curriculum committee, we said this matters to us. And so it positions other faculty who don't necessarily see this as important as, oh, well, okay, maybe it is important because I trust Claire or I trust other colleagues. I'm not going to name them here. And we're seeing it. We also just did a climate survey in our department specifically. And so we're saying, okay, what's happening? You don't have to look too far to see health inequities. And so if we're going to say we're nurses and part of our code of ethics is social justice, and people are tired of me sharing the definition of social justice from the American Nurses Association, but it is so robust. And so I bring it up every time I can. And I tell students, you're not going to graduate from our program becoming a nurse who can graduate and get a PhD eventually and not know how to define racism or how it impacts our communities or transphobia. So we're slowly building in norms, but it's really about having conversations around how do we make these topics, it's almost like when folks resist it, why is that? Is it because they don't see it as relevant? Mm-hmm. Is it because it makes them uncomfortable? Is it that makes them feel like, what can I do as one person with these big topics? So a lot of it is that deeper assessment and knowing, what do you believe in? What's important to you? Let's have those conversations. I don't have to always have them. I need white allies and other folks to have conversations with others. But that is part of the work that needs to be done, is figuring out what is keeping folks from doing it. But also it leads to the importance of university wide committees, right? In terms of 5-year program assessments, things like that.
Can either of you talk a little bit more about data? I know Beth mentioned about, I think it was you or Claire who showed the statistics and also how data can be aggregated, but most of these universities don't aggregate data.
That's
so can you talk a little bit more about the importance of aggregating PIDA data and what the implication is, even for student success or faculty retention?
I'm going to just say a thing and then I'm going to toss it to Claire because I think Claire is really grounded in the data. But I think that's the privilege that we have as being in health sciences. I also, speaking to the last question just briefly, is, our part of our mission statement is to serve diverse communities. And I also teach a social course. So, there's for a long time, I don't know if this still goes on, but there's a long tradition of, quote, sending students on medical missions. And it ends up being even the terminology is problematic around a mission. It has this kind of savior type of mentality. So I think Claire and I both have advocated, and Claire specifically in community nursing, but you know, I've advocated for having labs basically where the students go serve people in our community in low income areas and so on and so forth, rather than this focus so much on the medical missions. So I think there's ways that we can, you know, on a real practical level, get folks to the table, because that's part of our mission in health. And in terms of data, I think the data, okay, let me just tell you, be frank with you all. So that's my big thing is I hate being, as oftentimes I think as AP the folks, we're considered quote honorary white people because of sometimes of our skin color, or whatever, and also white adjacent. I just hate those terms. And so oftentimes, just like Claire said, a lot of our folks are suffering in silence because, you know, we're not considered worthy of having support. And so that's where the data comes really into play, because not everyone, you know, in our APIDA tent in terms of populations are affluent or doing well or middle class even, or what have you. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Claire and let her speak to that more.
Thanks, Beth. I would go back and see what are all of the surveys and the findings at your institutions that are done. Connect directly with the director of institutional effectiveness and research and say, what are we doing? And in California State University system, we have a horrendous graduation equity gap. I can't even, I know there are folks here from the CSU system. It is horrendous. We are failing our communities. And so really directly connect, you know. So for example, with the PIFSA, API Faculty Staff Association, we asked our director to come and speak to us. What are the data? What do we need to know here? And it allows us to be an active, a fighting organization, not only a space where we are healing and connecting when they're suffering, but also to say we need to advocate for a student success center for API or APIDA students. But also we're looking at faculty demographics and what that means for curriculum, for who, you know, reviews tenure dossiers and, you know, promotion dossiers, et cetera. So again, unpack URM, unpack API. I was surprised to find out that among the groups with highest attrition at my university are Filipino students. Or if you look at in your professions, right, in your different disciplines, what are the trends? In California baccalaureate nursing programs, the highest attrition rates are among African-American and Black students, Latinx students, and then Filipino students. So for me, attrition really just means failing our communities, failing students. And so what are all the metrics and how do we need to change those? What are the workarounds needed? And so I think just creating organizations, if you don't already have those centers, and saying that these are the evidence we need. And so I'll just stop there. I want to make sure there's time for additional questions, but happy to connect more if folks want to email and be in touch.
Anybody else with a question for Beth and Claire? I think this is really helpful for folks to understand that although people are looking at you as, you know, you don't want to talk, or, you know, you're the model minority, that really, this is just a myth. And it also depends on who you are and what the issue is. But also there's the power of the collective. And I think we need to be working together.
Something I'll add too is look to examples at multiple institutions or across disciplines. If you can say, you know what, I found that folks here are doing this, there's a reason it's happening, right? For example, you know, and let's bring it to our institutions. So you're sharing information and movement happening elsewhere as one way for you to advocate for that consideration of that there, right? So, yeah.
Any final thoughts about this? What are your last words to, yes, it's complicated, but.
I'm not that great at multitasking. I was just responding to the chat, but I'm going to leave the chat alone for now. So what are our takeaways basically?
Yeah, basically, like, what is your parting shot? You know, it's all complicated, yes, but this is how one thing you can do to move this community forward.
Well, you know, I guess I would just say is, I hope you don't feel defeated. I hope you feel like there's hope. And, I've actually witnessed so many things in my lifetime that I never thought I would witness in my profession before, and just in society as a whole. I think the murder of George Floyd has moved the needle somewhat, and the window has, I'm always fearful that the window is closing as we speak, but I think there's a little bit more space to delve into these kinds of issues and the complexities of our beautiful cultures and traditions that are sometimes so much, as Claire mentioned, so much in contrast to white supremacy, basically, because we're a very collective culture, like many BIPOC cultures, and we're not so much the individualistic cultures. And so just that fact in academia is an oxymoron to me, because it feels very competitive for students even, right? Get the best grades, do this and that. So again, I think, please don't get discouraged. Some days I feel very defeated. But we can't stay silent anymore. And I think that's kind of our whole message is we have to speak up. I'm gonna pass you, Claire.
I would really say I center relationships. That is at the core, with students, with staff, with faculty, with comrades. Our struggles are particular, but also given these systems of imperialism and white supremacy, when one group wins, another group wins, and we do this together, right? So I see the work in particular with Filipinx communities, but I will show up if the Anti-Police Terror Project says our Black and Brown youth are being attacked. Show up to the sit-in. I will show up to the sit-in and say, I am fully Filipina here. I am fully a nurse here. No one's gonna fracture my identities, though it sometimes feels that way. I'm always an educator, always a nurse, always a mom, always the descendant of many who fought for us to be here. So please connect, share emails. We keep each other stronger. We keep each other through the moments when we just want to leave XYZ location or situation. But we're stronger together. And I know you all are doing amazing things, and I appreciate you being here, and I want to learn from you all too. So I hope we can connect at a future NCORE in person, maybe in Portland.
So stay together. Don't be defeated. We can do this. I want to thank you both so very much, Dr. Ching and Dr. Valderrama Wallace. And I hope that folks can drop a thank you in the chat. Thank you so very much. It's really always good to build community. And like you both said, most of our communities are very communal. We draw strength from each other. So this was one of the webinars where, we wanted you all to draw strength from each other. And when you share, when you share whatever you're going through, we say in my language, the problem is half solved. I think even the English say that. But we have to continue finding ways to reconnect. So connect with Claire and Beth. Their emails are in there. Connect them with them in Portland next year. If you're coming to NCORE 2022, we shall be in Portland, Oregon, May 31st to June 4th. Connect with NCORE. Let us know whether there are other conversations you'd want us to bring to you. And truly, let's be that community where you feel you belong. I was very moved when Beth said, when I have to come to NCORE to feel refreshed. So we have to have each other's back. And I know sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's difficult, but as you both said, we have to show up. Show up and we're stronger together. So thank you so very much, everybody who joined us from the University of Oklahoma here in Norman. I want to thank everybody, and we'll see you for our next workshop or webinar. And thank you so very much to our interpreters from the folks from Sorenson, Lisa, Taiwo, our captionable, my NCORE team, Kathy, Stephanie, Corey, and everybody else involved in this production. Thank you all so very much. Have a good evening.